The Kabbalistic Shofar, painting the moon, lighting up the Shekhinah. I'm Nathaniel Berman, Shana Tova. What I want to share with you over the next few minutes is an approach to Rosh Hashanah, to two of the most central questions of Rosh Hashanah that I think is probably unfamiliar to many of you. And what are those questions? One is, why is judgment aroused on this day? We know that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. Why is judgment aroused on this day? Or rather, how is judgment aroused on this day? And two, this shofar, what does it signify? What is the meaning of the shofar? What does it do? These are two questions that are raised in the Zohar, the central work of Kabbalah, and I will get to that in a second. Before I reach Kabbalah, let's look at the traditional or Talmudic response to some of these questions. And they all start with a certain verse that goes like this. It's from Psalms, from Tehillim, chapter 81. Tik'u v'chodesh shofar b'kesel liyom chagenu, ki chok liYisrael hu mishpat Elohei Yaakov. Blast the shofar on the new moon, when the moon is covered on our festival day, for it is a statute for Israel, a law for the God of Jacob. What does this mean? What is the juxtaposition of the first part and the second part of the verse between the shofar and the law for the God of Jacob? The Talmud has an answer. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, from the tractate Rosh Hashanah. For it is a statute for Israel, an ordinance for the God of Jacob. This teaches that the court above, the heavenly court, does not assemble for judgment until the court below, the earthly court, sanctifies the moon. That somehow human action is what precipitates heavenly deeds, the heavenly court. There's some kind of reciprocal relationship, something that humans do that activates the divine. How does this work? What does this even mean? If the court below does not sanctify the moon, does the heavenly court not sit? What are the Talmudic sages getting at? Well, it is not completely clear in the Talmud. So let's turn to Kabbalah. And these next few minutes will be kind of an introduction to Kabbalah for those who are not familiar with it. But it is just the tip of a very, very large iceberg, or a spark from a very, very large flame. The central work of Kabbalah, and the one I will be focusing on, is called Sefer Zohar, the Book of Splendor. And this is the cover of one of the first printed editions of the Zohar, printed in Mantua, Italy, in the middle of the 16th century. The Zohar collects writings composed by Kabbalists working mostly in Castile in Spain in the late 13th century. And it is the central resource of Kabbalah, the place where everyone goes back to when they want to study Kabbalah. It's where all of Kabbalah grows out of. I'm not going to give you a complete introduction to Kabbalah here, but just one little thing that may surprise you if you're unfamiliar with it. Is in Kabbalah, especially in the Zohar, there are several different divine figures. We know Judaism is a monotheism, and in the Zohar, it's the union of these figures that makes oneness. And there are at least 5 of these figures, and I found a little bit of a whimsical diagram to explain this. There's a figure, the uppermost figure called Arich Anpin, the patient one, or the great-faced one. Below him is a couple, Abba and Ima, the sublime father and the sublime mother. Below them are 2 figures called either Zeir Anpin, the impatient one, or the lesser countenance, or sometimes he's simply called the Blessed Holy One, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and his female consort, who's sometimes called the Nukva, the female one, and sometimes called the Shekhinah, more often called the Shekhinah. Now, you don't have to get all of this because we are really going to be focusing on the two female divine personae. And those are the two most important divine figures for Rosh Hashanah. The uppermost one is called Ima Ilah, the sublime mother. She's also called the heavenly Shofar. She's also called the world to come, and many other things. And her daughter, the Shekhinah, or Shechinta in Aramaic, who's associated with the moon. Sometimes she's called the precious stone, and she is as we will see in these materials, and many other images are associated with her. So that's just a little introduction to Kabbalistic mythology, and we want to focus on these two female figures, the mother and the daughter, Ima Ilah and the Shekhinah. Now, let's turn to the Zohar. The Zohar tells stories. Zohar likes to tell stories. It begins the story this way. Rabbi Abba was sitting before Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is the main sage of the Zohar. He said to him, "So many times I've asked about the shofar. What does it signify? And up until now, I have not been settled with it." Very surprising in some ways. A great sage unable to understand what the shofar is about. Let's look at what the answer that he's given is. Come and see. When the sublime shofar, which contains the light of all, departs and does not illuminate for the children, then judgment is aroused and the thrones of the court are prepared. And here I've plunged you deep into the deep end of Kabbalistic mythology. The sublime, what is this sublime shofar? The text doesn't tell us. If you study enough Zohar, you know the sublime shofar is the sublime mother, the uppermost female divine figure. She contains the light of all. She is the cosmic womb. She contains everything. When she departs and does not illuminate for her children, and her children include both her divine children and her earthly children, when she departs, when she stops, when the divine shofar stops blowing, then judgment is aroused and the thrones of the court are prepared. That judgment is only made possible by a certain restriction of the divine. And this idea will become very important in later Kabbalah as well, but it has its roots in the Zohar. Judgment is the absence of the divine mother bestowing compassion on her children. And again it says, when this great shofar departs and does not suckle the children, then judgment is prepared for the world. And here we see that our relationship to this divine mother is a relationship of suckling. It's also the relationship of her divine children, the Blessed Holy One and the Shekhinah. Again, if you've never studied Kabbalah before, this might sound shocking, but just go with me until the end here. So what do? The mother has departed, judgment is prepared. What can we do? And when human beings return from their sins, they must draw forth the sound, the voice. That's a Hebrew and Aramaic word that could mean either sound or voice, of the shofar from below. Our earthly shofar, our little material shofar. We blow on our little shofars and the other sublime shofar is aroused. The great mother is aroused and compassion is aroused and judgment departs. That's the power of our little puny earthly shofar, is we can induce the great shofar, the divine mother, to start sounding again and to bestow compassion on the world. And with these voices of the shofar from below, Israel gives strength above. Human beings strengthen the heavens, strengthen the divine. And therefore, we must prepare the shofar on this day and to arrange the voices, to intend thereby to arouse the other shofar, the divine shofar, which includes all voices above. That is the power of the earthly shofar. Now, I'm going to go to another Zohar passage that explains that it's not quite so simple. We that blow the shofar from below, the Great Mother sounds the great shofar from above. Turns out it's not so simple. There are obstacles. There are obstacles. And those obstacles include the obstacles within our own evil inclinations, as well as evil forces in the cosmos that need to be struggled against. Let's look at another passage from the Zohar. Why is judgment aroused on this day? And it answers, when the time comes to renew the blessings, it is necessary to survey all the facets of the world. Then judgment is aroused. That the renewal of the world on Rosh Hashanah, on the new year, requires first judgment. Renewal will happen, but first there has to be judgment in order to decide whether and who and how renewal will happen. But judgment in the Zoharic conception is something that the divine is resistant to and goes against the nature of the divine. And so look at this next passage. From that judgment, the demonic other side is strengthened, and the accuser appears and covers the moon. In the Zohar, the demonic side of the cosmos is called the other side, the Sitra Achra, and is associated with the devil, actually. The accuser here is another word for Satan, or Samael, the devil, and covers the moon. Remember, the moon is associated with the Shekhinah. Remember that Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday that occurs when the moon is dark, when the moon is covered. Of course, Rosh Chodesh is every month, but the only actual holiday when the moon is covered. And this is an explanation for that. Why is that? They say because the demonic forces are covering the moon, and that prevents divine compassion from reaching us, and it subjects us to the powers of judgment, which in the Zoharic view is very closely related to the demonic. Again, a lot of Kabbalistic mythology, food for thought. And this other side stands as a hard shell that cannot be broken. So the hard shell on the moon, the covering of the moon, the darkness, which in the Zohar conception is equivalent to judgment, allows the forces of judgment to prevail upon us, it cannot be broken, except with that counsel that the Blessed Holy One gives to Israel. And what is that counsel? The shofar. When Israel arouses from below with the shofar, this voice that issues from the shofar knocks against the ether, breaks through the heavens until it ascends to that hard boulder that covers the moon and confounds it. So our shofar is not simply calling out to the Divine Mother, it has to first break through the hard boulder that covers the moon. Then this voice endures, and that judgment passes away, and one's compassion is aroused from below, so it is from above. The other sublime shofar is aroused and brings forth a voice, which is compassion. We can only reach the Sublime Mother by first breaking the demonic shell, the adversity, all those forces which prevent our tshuva, are getting in touch with the divine that are covering now the moon, and is the reason why the moon is dark. And this is my favorite passage here, that's why I put it in special typeface. And voice intertwines with voice, compassion with compassion. And with the arousal from below, so it is aroused from above. I'll read that in Aramaic. So beautiful. It aru kala bekala, rachame berachame, uviit aruta dilatata, it ar hachinami le'ela. Voice intertwines with voice. Our voice of our shofar from below intertwines with the voice of the shofar, the great Divine Mother from above, compassion with compassion. and intertwining. And with the arousal from below, from our earthly shofar, so it is aroused from above. And what about the Shekhinah? What about that intermediary female figure? And within the shofar, our shofar, a voice is aroused, comprised of fire and water and wind, and they become one. That's what's coming out of our shofar, fire and water and wind, and they become one and ascend above, right? And this one voice knocks on that precious stone, on the moon, the Shekhinah, and it is painted with the colors of this voice, the painted moon, now being receptive to compassion from above and breaking all the forces of adversity from below. And once she is adorned with that voice, when she, the Shekhinah, the moon, is adorned with the voice of our shofar, compassion goes forth from above. She receives compassion from her mother, the divine mother, from above and dwells upon her. And she is comprised of compassion from above and below. And all judgment departs. And this precious stone endures with a shining face from all sides, in the light from below and the light from above. Hai Evan Tava, Kaima Benihiru da Anpin Mikol Sichin, Benihiru Dilatata, Benihiru Dilaela. And that's what the power of our earthly shofar. The idea that somehow human action is actually crucial for the workings, the inner workings of the divine, and through our shofar, we get in touch with these two divine female figures, the Shekhinah and Ima Ilah, the Great Mother. And so when you're sitting, listening to the shofar, whether it's at home or on Zoom or in a shul, this is what's happening. Imagine fire and the water and the wind painting the moon, breaking the demonic, enabling the Shekhinah to receive compassion from above. The Kabbalistic shofar painting the moon, lighting up the Shekhinah. Shana Tova.